In the novel Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor, the Logan family, as seen through the innocent eyes of Cassie, navigates through life helping others and learning lessons along the way in the setting of Strawberry, Mississippi. These life lessons are shaped by the environment in which they live 68 years after slavery has been abolished and society is in the height of sharecropping. What is sharecropping? It is a form of agriculture in which a landowner allows a tenant to use the land in return for a share of the crops produced on their portion of land. These crops included cotton, tobacco, and rice. Though the system was believed to be mutually beneficial to both parties, typically white landowners and freed African Americans, it was slavery in a new form that gave the perception of freedom. Sharecropping was designed as a way to keep former slaves poor and uneducated. Mildred paints a vivid picture of the effects of sharecropping on the lives of children on page 15 of her book, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. The Great Faith Elementary and Secondary School, one of the largest black schools in the county, was a dismal end to an hour's journey. The school was located near 3 plantations, the largest and closest by far being the Granger Plantation. Most of the students were from families that sharecropped on Granger land, and the others mainly from Montier and Harrison plantation families. Because the students were needed in the fields from early spring when the cotton was planted until after most of the cotton had been picked in the fall, the school adjusted its terms accordingly, beginning in October and dismissing in March. But even so, after today, a number of the older students would not be seen again for a month or two, not until the last puff of cotton had been gleaned from the fields, and eventually most would drop out of school altogether. Because of this, the classes in the higher grades grew smaller with each passing year. To fully understand the effects of sharecropping and how it compares to slavery, one must understand the true definition of slavery. Slavery is defined as a group of people who are deemed as less, their freedom is restricted, and they live in exhausting, laborious conditions. Mildred is clearly describing these horrific conditions in Mississippi in her book. The sharecropping system stripped people of a proper education and forced them to replace it with manual labor. In the sharecropper cycle of poverty, sharecroppers receive land and seed. To use the land, the sharecropper promises the landowner, by entering a contract, half of their crop, and in some cases more than that. He then buys food and clothing on credit from the landowner. After harvesting the crop, the sharecropper gives to the landowner to sell, but after selling, the landowner informs the sharecropper that he owes more than he earned. The sharecropper is left to work the next year to pay off the remaining debt, repeating the cycle in many cases. So why would people agree to such a contract then? Because there are no realistic alternatives. One of the many examples of sharecropping contracts is one signed between I.G. Bailey and 2 freed families of Charles Roberts and Cooper Hughes. In this contract, both families agreed to cultivating of 40 acres of corn and 20 of cotton, helping to put up fences and doing all the work necessary to keep the farm in good working order. And Charles Roberts Freedman, with his wife Hannah, further agreed to do the washing and ironing and all other necessary housework for I.G. Bailey and his family, and they would receive $50 by the end of 1867 for these extra services. So basically, their compensation was half of their cotton, 1/3 of their corn, and up to 500 pounds of meat, and the $50 for the cleaning. So let's do the math here. In 2013, the price per acre for cotton is $476, and the price per acre for corn is $936. So if we do the math, Multiply it out for 20 acres of cotton and 40 acres of corn, the return is almost $10,000 for cotton and almost $38,000 for corn. But if you subtract out the compensation of 1/2 of cotton and 2/3 of corn, you walk away with almost 17 grand. This is without expenses, no supplies, tools, and feeding for children. So can a family really live on this while being responsible for the upkeep of the plantation, supplies, tools, and feeding their children? The answer is no. And Mildred Taylor describes it perfectly when she writes from the eyes of Cassie Logan, "When the fields ended and the Granger forest spanned both sides of the road with long overhanging branches, a tall, emaciated-looking boy popped suddenly from a forest trail and swung a thin arm around Stacy. It was T.J. Avery. His younger brother Claude emerged a moment later, smirking weakly as if it had pained him to do so. Neither boy had on shoes, and their Sunday clothing, patched and worn, hung loosely upon their frail frames. The Avery family sharecropped on Granger land. The effects of sharecropping were no different than slavery. Families were poor, children were hungry, and there was no end in sight." Even though there were no chains and African Americans were free to come and go as they pleased, though the risk of persecution was immense, sharecropping was a form of institutional slavery that gave the appearance of freedom. Sharecropping was intended to benefit both parties, the white landowners and freed slaves, but it was clearly used to exploit the limitations of African Americans. Many African Americans became indebted to the landlord, initially by contract and eventually by the perpetual debt of giving over half their earnings. It was a vicious cycle that did not see an end until the 1950s. Until then, African Americans had no choice but to continue to work on plantations to feed and educate their children as best they could. Even though the Logans went through hard times in Strawberry, Mississippi, it didn't break their resiliency. As said by Mama, "We have no choice what color we're born, or who our parents are, or whether we're rich or poor. What we do have is some choice over what we make of our lives once we're here. And I pray to God that you'll make the best of yours."